I'd like to invite Lucy Turnbull from the Greater Sydney Commission up to the stage. Lucy, as many of you will know, is the recently appointed Chief Commissioner of the Greater Sydney Commission and is tasked by the New South Wales Government to assist in the delivery of strong and effective planning for the whole of metropolitan Sydney. Now, as many of you will also know, Lucy was the first female Lord Mayor of the City of Sydney in 2003 and 2004. And today we'll be talking about the opportunities that the Greater Sydney Commission will present for us. So please, welcome to the stage, Lucy Turnbull. You should be on next.
Okay, I haven't done slides for today. I apologise for that. Now, can I just say how wonderfully structured this series of talks is today? Because I'm very sorry to have missed Holly earlier, but I think Claire's presentation was a brilliant, precursor to what I'm going to talk about. Because Claire, being one of the most senior bureaucrats in New South Wales in the transport area, has delivered a really good and very specific and well described and fleshed out state of play in what's happening in transport as a system. You know, what Claire and Transport do an amazing job. Can I say, I've had an Opal card since day one, and that has transformed the way the transport system certainly works for me. And I'm very glad, Claire, that you've come to live here and you saw the wisdom of getting an Opal card. Well, it'd be weird if you didn't, let's be honest. But transport as a system is working so much better than it has for a long time, not least because of the adoption of that very essential piece of technology which everybody who uses the system now almost takes completely for granted. So Claire has described and I think given a very optimistic and positive presentation on what's happening in the future, and I think we can all take enormous comfort and strength from the fact that transport is really focusing very significantly on all sorts of transport investment, but in particular the active transport investment that is so needed for our health and our well-being, and we all know that. I'll talk about that in the future, but also to make the city, the city and the state not only livable but competitive and productive, because the more active moving around we can do, the less congestion there is, the less choking on lesser air quality. So our lifestyle is enhanced, and also urban productivity is enhanced. So it's a win-win for the city as a metropolitan region, which is very much my area of responsibility. So I think that everybody in this room is very, very well aware of the very strong links between planning and health. And if you look at a better planned city, it actually creates more opportunities, more of a canvas upon which a healthy lifestyle can be built. And I think that we understand that very, very well now in the light of the dominance of the motor car from the 1950s in particular, really until the present day. But motor car usage seems to have peaked in a lot of cities now. The proliferation and the ubiquity of the motor car really created the environment where cities for the first time became unwalkable. Cities had always been walkable, but then the motor car kind of broke that nexus between city structure, city shape and walkability. And there's no greater city shaper than the transport options that people have as they move around the city, go to work, recreation, taking kids to school. So transport is the biggest city shaper, and painting a city with a very strong spine of walkability and cyclability is very fundamental to building healthy cities. Now, I think I'll tell you so quickly going back, before the ubiquity of the motor car from the 50s, 60s and 70s, all cities were, relatively speaking, quite dense. On average, there were exceptions, of course, but on average, cities were very dense. There were, like think of the Victorian suburbs of the inner city areas. And what's interesting is that there was a period for a decade or two when moving to the suburbs became everybody's ideal, and the inner city areas became, depopulated, and they were seen as being very disadvantaged parts of the city. Well, of course, that has completely reversed now. And nowadays you have sort of socioeconomic deprivation tends to be concentrated in the periphery of cities, in the very non-walkable suburbs. And it's for those reasons I think that you get higher incidences of obesity, diabetes, blood pressure and heart disease in the walking poor, the low walkability neighbourhoods. So creating walkable neighbourhoods, walkable precincts, cyclable precincts is a very fundamental part of creating healthy communities in this day and age, which of course has the heritage, the historical resonance that we're actually going back to the future. What we actually need to do is build cities in the same way as we used to build cities before the proliferation of suburbs. What's, I think, notable is that the suburbs now exist. So connectivity across large metropolitan areas like Sydney has never been more important than it is now. It becomes fundamentally more important in very low density cities like Sydney. So what Sydney's success and future urban success, I think, very strongly depends upon connectivity through creating a polycentric urban structure where you have, you know, the city here on the eastern edge of the metropolitan area, Parramatta right in the spatial and demographic middle of metropolitan Sydney, and the other large centres like Penrith, Campbelltown, Liverpool, etc., and there are many others. Those polycentres need to create the quality of urban walkability and density at the where people can not only live very fulfilled lives but also work, have a lot of work and educational options in those polycentres outside the city centre itself. At the same time as the connectivity between those polycentres is increased and enhanced. And of course that's where Transport for New South Wales plays such a fundamentally important role. Now, can I quickly mention a really interesting article I read recently, which was about the city of Oklahoma, which I've also read quite a bit about in education policy, which is completely unrelated to that, so I won't dwell on it. But in the PISA rankings, in the educational standardization rankings, Oklahoma, in a book called The Smartest Kids in the World, was described and analysed as having very low educational outcomes. So my interest in Oklahoma was triggered when I heard that the mayor of Oklahoma had declared war on obesity several years ago. Now, he was a Republican mayor, and he himself was somewhat overweight, I think obese. He called himself obese, and he actually adopted a policy for the whole of Oklahoma, which a public education campaign to advocate everybody losing some weight. Now, apparently, you know, many millions of pounds collectively were lost in Oklahoma. But what was interesting is in his journey on his and his city's journey, he discovered, or actually became aware, that walkability and having options for an active lifestyle was fundamental for city planning. So he worked with transport agencies, which he was responsible for, and actually did a lot of investment, hundreds of millions of dollars in actually creating a more walkable city. And this is a city with very, very poor health outcomes. Notably, he also, you may be aware that Mike Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York City, banned what they call soda drinks, soft drinks over a certain size. I don't know whether it was 12 ounces or 8 ounces, I'm not sure. But they basically banned those drinks in New York City, which was, had a very compelling public health rationale for doing that. But he decided not to go quite that hard and regulatory. He decided to actually work with fast food businesses to encourage them to have low fat, lower energy, lower kilojoule meals on offer, because he was aware that people wouldn't in their lives be able to go cold turkey on fast food, but if there were more options for healthier food, then that would be a better outcome than expecting them to go completely cold turkey on relying on convenience food, because as everybody leads busy lives, it's hard to achieve that. So by declaring a war on obesity, the mayor was actually able to shift behavioural attitudes and outcomes. And I think that what we're seeing here is that the state government of New South Wales, and I commend the mayor, the Premier, very much for doing this, because what he's doing is he's basically working within the framework of government to encourage government and stakeholder groups to work together to declare war on obesity. Now, we have, of course, an extremely slim and fit Premier, so it's a little different circumstance, but I commend him for doing what they have done very successfully in Oklahoma. Now, I am the Chief Commissioner of the Greater Sydney Commission, as Chris pointed out. Brackets, I hesitate to add, I don't wear a uniform. No epaulets, no badges, anything like that. But the role of the newly created Greater Sydney Commission is to make sure that there is very integrated planning for metropolitan Sydney. Now, it's always been an aspiration to have well-integrated planning, but I think the government actually understands at a very fundamental level that if infrastructure, transport and land use planning are not well integrated and well conceived together, then it's unlikely that the city will succeed in terms of its livability, in terms of its productivity and in terms of its environmental quality. So our job is actually to work across government, to work with local government and with the multiplicity of stakeholders in the community to ensure that integrated, well-conceived thinking. And, you know, I guess my dream, or the collective dream of the Commissioner, is to have, when we do Sydney's plan, we'll be doing the district plans. There are 6 districts in the metropolitan area, so we'll be planning at a district level, greatly assisted by a district commissioner for each of the 6 districts, to do district plans which really layer in a visual and a conceptual way and also a visual way how Sydney's planning does and will work. And that obviously will start with landform, built environment, transport, other infrastructure, environment, open spaces, you know, active living, educational infrastructure and health infrastructure, so that really for the first time that all the transport, infrastructure, planning, education, health, many other agencies actually work together to have a multi-layered, very comprehensive plan for Sydney. And Claire mentioned the stakeholder engagement strategy, and that is going to be fundamental to what we do. And we look forward, being acutely aware that there is no greater city shaper than transportation, investment and delivery and systems. So we plan to work very carefully with transport as one of our very key partners in that very strong, I think, really powerful citizen engagement, which will use multiple platforms. Now, the Commission has already published, to some extent, the evidence base upon which we'll be doing our district planning, so that people understand the factual context within which we'll be starting to consider those plans and engage with the community about those plans. One of the outcomes that we need to have is to develop a dashboard about Sydney's performance, about how it's performing against the Plan for Growing Sydney, the new Metropolitan Plan released in December 2014, but also more generally how Sydney is performing across the board in livability, productivity, environmental quality, etc. So that dashboard is being developed as we speak, and it will be rolled out in sections and in stages, so people do understand that we will build that dashboard over time, as if we were building as if we were software engineers, which in a sense we are. And again, we'll be working closely with Transport and the Digital Analytics Centre and Service New South Wales and lots of other agencies at making sure, and the Industry Department, Jobs for New South Wales will be, the key to what we do is actually working with multiple stakeholders inside government as well as outside government. Now we know that we have to develop. We have to help deliver and monitor the plan for growing Sydney, and that's a very big task. It involves delivering a lot of housing, a lot more jobs, particularly jobs outside the traditional CBD, and as well as doing a very good job at creating attractive public spaces and transport options. Now, we are one of our good duties is being committed to work with the New South Wales Healthy Planning Expert Working Group to develop guidelines for planning, designing, and developing a healthy built environment. So that's very important. What we do know is that the shape of 19th century, sort of early 20th century pre-motor car cities is a lot healthier shape than a lot of the planning that actually happened in the height of the dispersion, the suburban dispersion of Sydney. And so we know that subdivisions with cul-de-sacs which are not walkable or cyclable easily are not good. We know that actually having a good, tight metropolitan grid city is very good. We know that we need to create that quality of urban walkability right across the metropolitan area, particularly in those polycentres of Sydney. The CBD, which is probably one of the most walkable parts of anywhere in the world, I think, but also other parts of the other polycentres of Sydney. So we really look forward to working with all the government agencies on delivering that. So we will be delivering on the state government's key priorities, which is to create more housing and housing choice, on creating Sydney's competitiveness, on promoting Sydney's competitiveness as a global city, and also on environmental quality and social inclusion. One of the things we need to do, and this is which could be very useful for enhancing active transport and active lifestyles, is when we're preparing the district plans, we will also be preparing infrastructure priority lists every 12 months and delivery and report on the delivery against those priority lists. And those priority lists, of course, will have many sorts of infrastructure in them. We won't be dealing with the infrastructure over $100 million, which Infrastructure New South Wales does, but we will be looking at the infrastructure up to $100 million, which will be important for growing the city, to make Sydney's growth, prosperity, livability and sustainability a good thing over the next 10 to 20 years. Not a bad thing, and as I mentioned, community engagement is most fundamental to that. Thank you very much. Okay.
We've probably got time for one quick question. Anyone got a burning question? Kerry. There's a microphone coming.
Kerry Doyle from the Heart Foundation. Just how is the up to $100 million and the over $100 million going to talk to each other?
Well, one of our key partners together with Transport for New South Wales is Infrastructure for New South Wales. So we need to take into account the infrastructure on the infrastructure, New South Wales infrastructure plan, but the infrastructure up to that is where we will be drawing priority lists. And obviously we don't want to trip over what local government's doing. I forgot to mention that one of the key deliverables for us is the implementation of the green grid that the New South Wales government architect worked on last year and has delivered, and we need to work in close partnership with local government to help deliver that green grid. There will be grants and awards to projects which help deliver on that grid. And so delivering that grid will be fundamental to increasing active lifestyle choices. And we won't be tripping over each other. We're very keen not to do that. That's our mantra is collaboration and integration and engagement.
Look, I see tremendous potential for the up to $100 million to shape the over $100 million. So that's really encouraging.
Good.
All right. That's really inspiring in many ways. So please join me with thanking Lucy Turnbull.